When you have collected data, it's useful to use plots and graphs to see what the data looks like before you continue to analyze the data. If you know what the data looks like, the interpretation of the analyses and the results from your analyses will be much easier. So to do this, we go to Graphs and we click on Chart Builder. And a menu will open with which you can create different kinds of plots based on the data that you have. For example, we can request a scatter plot. If I double click on Simple Scatter Plot, the axes where I can drag variables to will appear here in the preview screen. And here you can see the input field where you can drag the variables you want to have on the x-axis. I did research in which I did a pre and post measurement on a math test in different classes. So for example, I can drag the variable class to the x-axis, and then the score on the post measurement to the y-axis. Now the scores on the post measurement for the three categories, the three classes, are displayed. Let me show you the graph. I'm going to click on paste. I then run the syntax, and then you will see the scores on the post measurement displayed for classes 1, 2, and 3 in this scatter plot. There are a lot of other options, and we're going to look at a few of them. So let's reset this first. It's also possible to look at the relationship between the post and pre-measurement score, for example. Suppose that I expect that the relationship between the post-measurement score and the pre-measurement score are going to be different between boys and girls. Then I can click on Group Scatter Plot, and then the setup changes and a new box appears in which I can specify the grouping variable. In this case, sexe, gender, because in this case I expect the relationship to be different for boys and for girls. Then I get different colored dots for different genders. And this is of course an example. There are two kinds of genders in my data, and 3 different colors are displayed. So this is not how it will eventually look. Reset this. We can also request bar charts. For example, with the simple bar chart, I can look at the mean score on the post measurement for the different classes. Here too I can specify a grouping variable, for example gender again. This means that in this case I get different bars for the different genders. The boys get their own bar and the girls get their own bar per class. Then I have to add a dependent variable, in this case the score on the post measurement, and then the mean score on the post measurement is displayed per class for gender in separate bars. You can see element properties here. For me it pops up automatically. If not, you can request it right here. Under element properties you can adjust all kinds of things. At bar 1 it is now indicated that it displays a mean score. That's correct, but you can also request all kinds of other types of scores here, such as a sum score. You can also request error bars. I request a confidence interval too, because I would like that to be displayed, because it allows me to interpret the plot better. By default, a 95% confidence interval is usually chosen, so I'm going to keep it that way for now. Don't forget to click on Apply, because otherwise nothing that you just did will be applied. Now you can see that the error bars have been added to the plot. For the x-axis, I can change the label right here. The label here is class, and I think that's clear enough. For the y-axis, it says mean score. I think that's clear as well. And the group color is in this case the grouping variable, which is again gender. I think that's also clear, so I'm going to leave it like that as well. I click paste, and I run the syntax. And then you'll see different bars will appear with a confidence interval per class with the mean score on the post measurement. So let's reset once more. We can also request a line graph, for example a simple line graph. For example, we can display the score for each class on the post measurement. We can also subdivide this by means of a grouping variable, for example, sexe, gender, and the score on the post measurement here. We're resetting again. If you have a mixed design study, you can drag the pre-measurement to the y-axis and the post-measurement as well. You can now see that a red plus appears. Click on OK. When you do this, you have repeated measures that are displayed in this way. The mean score on the y-axis and the measurement moment on the x-axis. The pre-measurement score and the post-measurement score. Of course, you can also add a grouping variable if you want. For example, different classes that have been taught different calculation methods. and that has been measured at 2 different moments. Then it will be nicely displayed in this way. Under element properties, I can again adjust several things. I want to display the error bars. It's important to know that in the case of mixed designs with repeated measures, the confidence intervals are not automatically displayed correctly. So to fix this, you need to apply a correction to the scores on the pre and post measurement. In this case, that has already been applied to the data, and how to do this I explain in another video. So I click on Apply again, the bars are displayed, I label the x-axis mate moment, time of measuring. Here I can change the order. For example, if I would like post-measurement score first and then pre-measurement score. In this case, it doesn't make sense, so I'll just leave it like this. I click Apply. The y-axis displays the mean score on the calculation test, gemiddelde score, and that's the label that I want. I click Apply. Group color is class. Let's keep that this way. Now I click Paste, and I run the syntax. And then in the output, you can see the plot for measuring moment, pre and post measurement scores, the mean score on the test at those measuring moments, and the different lines for the different classes. And now we can continue analyzing.